As I said a minute ago, I'm Lori Burrows. I'm here with my 7-year-old Greta. Say hi.
Hi.
And we are so excited to welcome y'all to our first ever History is Served dinner curbside. So thank y'all for being adaptable. We've all had to learn to be resilient and adaptable here in 2020, and we really wanted to do this regardless, and so we decided we'll just make it virtual, and so we made the food curbside. We are so excited about tonight. I get to volunteer with the museum through the foundation board, and I'm the president of that board, but I want to thank, I saw some of my fellow board members are on the call. I want to thank the foundation board for their support of tonight's event. We're going to hear from some amazing speakers, starting with the chef of the meal that you all are going to get to eat, or some of you may have already started on, which is fine too. But we're going to start also, but we had some sponsors for tonight's meal, and we'd like to thank those. Greta's going to say the name of our two sponsors.
Arkansas Electric Cooperative. She works at
That's
that.
true. That's where I work.
And Arkansas Rice Federation.
That's right, that big word. So the Arkansas Electric Cooperatives and the Arkansas Rice Federation were sponsors for tonight. So we appreciate
and the Historic Arkansas Museum Foundation.
That's right, and the Historic Arkansas Museum, or as we like to call it, the HAMF Foundation. So those three groups help support and make tonight possible, as did all of you by participating and picking up your meals and joining us. So thank you all and those sponsors for supporting tonight's event. Many of you already know who our chef is. That's what drew you to tonight's event, but we are really excited to have as one of our three speakers. The first one will be Chef Gilbert Alaquinez, and he's going to talk about how he created tonight's menu and give you a little bit of background on that. And then our second speaker is Dr. Jessica Harris. Dr. Harris is on screen if she can wave, so you'll know which one she is. And Dr. Harris is going to talk about the African diaspora's influence on Delta cuisine. And then our last speaker, who is also on screen and joining us from where she has her strongest internet connection in her husband's truck, is author Ann Martin. So we are really excited to hear from them. They're all going to speak for just a few minutes. Each of you has the chance, if you want to. I think I see Chef Gilbert now on screen. Yay, he's there. So if you want to, you can ask questions in the chat feature. I'll read those to the speakers. We would love, we know it's a little hard in Zoom land to be interactive, but we would love for you to join in and ask these esteemed speakers some questions. They know a lot about what they're talking about, and they love to talk about it. So please feel free to ask questions through the chat feature. Now, the first thing we're going to do, we will have Q&A after each speaker. So the first thing we're going to do a poll. We want this to be interactive. You're not just going to sit and listen to us talk. We want it to be interactive. We're going to ask a poll question, and it's on the screen, and Greta's going to read it too.
What is your favorite Delta food listed here?
So please pick your favorite Delta food. You know this is a celebration of food heritage. Pick your favorite Delta food from the following choices, and then we'll just, oh, it says we can't vote. So we voted for Okra, if it helps to know, but pick your favorite Delta food, and then we'll see the results on screen from everybody participating.
Well, it's supposed to be 4 courses, but I was just like, no, I need 5. Like, I gotta have this.
So did we get the results? It still says we're polling in progress. We'll give y'all a couple minutes to get those votes in on what your favorite Delta food is, because that's all what the History is Served series is about, is celebrating food heritage, and certainly the Delta has a lot of great foods to celebrate. So can we see the results? Well, there we go. Well, there was a clear winner, barbecue hands down, but then you can see the tamales and chicken and dumplings tied for second place, and okra too. That's what we would have voted for. Greta and I would have, but yeah, that's fun times to see what everybody likes, and biscuits were in there too. So that's fun. We'll have another poll at the end of the event, so please stay tuned for that. We want to see what your thoughts are on that. So now, Chef Gilbert, can you hear me? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Because you're up next. Great. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce you to the person who prepared the amazing food y'all get to consume tonight, Chef Gilbert Alaquinez. He created the meal, helped with, and also the menu. And then he's known in Central Arkansas for the Lab food truck, which if you've been around town, you've seen the Lab food truck. It's very much enjoyed and liked by locals. And you can follow them on Facebook and see what their latest menus and locations are and where you can find Chef Gilbert. And we're going to turn it over to him now. Okay, you're ready.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Gotta go with the menu. Yeah, okay. So I guess we'll start by going over the menu. Kind of just first and foremost, let me just say there is too much food, too much in the Delta to put on a menu. Let's just start there. So it was very difficult trying to pick 5 things that would work well, but it was a hard decision because I did want to put other things on there, but just because of the to-go option, and I knew it wasn't going to be at the restaurant, so we went ahead and went with these 5 items. But I guess on our food truck, we do Latin and Asian kind of fusion, little nuances to the food. So doing some research for the Delta, I learned that the Chinese actually had some influences, small influences, but influences nonetheless. So I thought it was pretty cool to add some of those influences and then some of my little twists on some of the menus. So for the first course, the field peas and chow chow, that one was pretty standard. I guess the little nuances that I did was the pork belly, and then we cured the pork belly with a little bit of cinnamon and clove to kind of give it just a little earthy, kind of warm flavor to it. And then the chow chow that went with the first course, I actually sourced all that produce from, there's a little farmer's market here in town called Urbana Farmstead. Margie is the woman that runs it. So she actually donated all the items for the chow chow and for the greens, actually. So we have green tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, a little bit of onion. So that's a typical dish with the black-eyed peas and the chow chow. The second dish, I wanted to do fried chicken, but I knew fried chicken just wouldn't hold up quite well in a box. So we went with a smothered chicken. And with this one kind of, not kind of, but it actually incorporated a lot of Arkansas products. So the rice itself is Ralston Family Farms golden rice. And then the rice that we actually breaded the chicken in is actually Ralston Family Farm again. We kind of grind that down and made our own rice flour. So the chicken is breaded in rice flour, and then it actually sits on the bed of Ralston Family Farms golden rice. And then for the gravy, I did a little bit different. I did an Arkansas tomato gravy. So most of the produce is from Arkansas, so I added a little bit of curry powder to kind of keep with those warm flavors kind of throughout the menu. So the smothered chicken is the rice with the rice breaded chicken, and then the curry tomato gravy on top. The third course, the rib plate, we got to have barbecue for Delta food. We got to have greens, and we got to have candied yams. So I kept this one pretty close to what you would get at a typical, barbecue joint. My favorite place that I go to is K Hall and Sons here in Little Rock, and that's kind of what my inspiration was. Thanks, Darren. Anyway, so again, keeping with those warm spices, I did a little Chinese spice into the candied yams. The greens, I went a little bit different. Actually, instead of regular hot sauce, I actually used Szechuan peppercorns. So I made my own chili oil with Szechuan peppercorns, cinnamon, cardamom, star anise, kind of fried all that together. So that's going to be that spicy kind of earthy note that's in the greens. And then the ribs, we cooked the ribs for about 12 hours. And then the barbecue sauce, I did a little bit of hoisin, and then Berber spice, which is an Ethiopian spice. kind of keeping that same, again, with the warm flavors of cinnamon, nutmeg, clove. So I thought just a little bit of different influences on a typical brick plate would be a cool kind of dish. So that was a third course. The fourth course, of course, it can't be a Delta menu without a red hot or tamale. So being from Mexican descent, definitely this is right up my alley. So I did a lot of research on this, was thinking, am I going to do corn husk? Am I going to do paper? Am I going to do pork? Am I going to do beef? So when the research was all said and done, corn husk was the number one thing as far as the wrapper. And then as far as the filling, beef was the more traditional filling in the Delta style tamale. So we use masa and cornmeal in the actual, I guess, the outside of the tamale. There's a little bit of guajillo, a little bit of cayenne pepper, a little bit of smoked paprika, and then we braised that same brisket with the guajillo sauce. So you got this nice kind of, again, earthy flavor kind of going throughout the dish. And then typically it's served with a chili. So we did that chili. We use the guajillo sauce again. So it's your typical Delta style tamale. So if you had any saltine crackers or any cheese, hopefully y'all added that to it. And then the last and final course, dessert. And of course, there's so many Southern desserts. They're all over the board. I just couldn't quite pick one, but one of my favorite desserts is actually a buttermilk pie. So when I saw that chess pie was a traditional Southern dessert, I went ahead and went with the chess pie and the recipe that I use, it calls for cornmeal, it has vinegar, and then I also added some more, just little, my touch, I guess, added some cardamom and added some cinnamon, just to kind of follow that same note kind of throughout the meal. You know, just kind of wanted to stay on the same flow. So, and just a little individual chess pie. It was supposed to have buttermilk whipped cream, but unfortunately, because of the heat, and I just could not keep it from melting, we had to forego that whipped cream. But I had one earlier, and it was pretty good without it, so I'm pretty sure it's going to be okay there at home. So I really appreciate the opportunity for this. And that's the menu. That's kind of the ideas and how kind of I threw together and picked what I picked for this menu. And I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Okay. Hi. Okay, great. Thanks, Chef Gilbert. Sorry. We're so glad to hear more about how you came up with the menu. And we do have, I want to remind everybody, since you're the first speaker, Chef Gilbert, you get to be our guinea pig, that we have the chat feature open. You have the option of sending it to all participants or just to the panelists. And Chef, I don't think you can see the comments, but we did have one person say it was delicious. So I'm sure lots of people thought it. One person took the time to type it in. So I want to make sure you heard that. And I'm sure you hear that a lot about your food. Does anyone have any questions? I don't recall on this platform, given the number of people, if you have the option to speak live and ask questions, but if you do want to ask a question, you can do it. We had some more people say, yes, it was delicious. Everything was delicious. Great meal. So thank y'all for chiming in and giving Chef your compliments. I know he appreciates them. I'm making sure we don't have any other chats of any questions for you about the work you do or about the dinner tonight. But thank you, Chef. The meal was great. Several folks said yes, it was delicious. So
awesome.
Okay. If there aren't any, well, let's see, there is a Q&A. Let me open the screen. Okay, Chef, we do have a question for you. It's blocking my screen. I hope you're still there because I'm reading the question, but it said, did you visit any restaurants that serve Delta tamales?
Is there any restaurant?
Yeah, did you visit any restaurants that serve Delta
Joe's
tamales?
Eat Place. And I know, so Dozy Place, and then kind of was talking to a couple other, I talked to Darren Hall of K. Hall and Sons. I talked to Chef Jamie from the Pine Bluff Country Club, because I didn't want to put too much of my Latin influence on a Delta tamale, because I knew the Delta tamale is kind of seasoned and done a certain way. So I wanted to make sure that I did it a certain way. But those, and actually Heights Tamale Taco Factory, they do a pretty good representation of the Delta tamale too. They got the chili on there. They serve it with saltine crackers. But yeah, those is where I actually got to try traditional, and I know theirs are wrapped in paper. So that was kind of my first, I guess, first time actually trying a Delta style tamale.
Chef, we had another question, which is, are the tamales available commercially?
No. It was kind of for this special dinner. I actually did think of that. I did have some brisket and some masa left over, and I was wondering if I should put them on the food truck as a special, maybe. And I might do it next week. So if you just pay attention to the Facebook or the Instagram, you definitely find out. But the idea did pop in my head. It's just that I don't know if we can do it out of a food truck. That would be the biggest obstacle. But obviously we did it for this dinner, so I don't know. We'll see. I'll definitely think about it. But yes, the thought definitely crossed my mind to put them or have them on the truck.
Well, that's a good reason for folks participating to start following you on social media, on Facebook and Instagram, because you share what your menus are and where you're going to be too. And so they can follow you there, and maybe you'll make some of what you made tonight, and then they can tell all their friends that they were the first people to get to try it. So we had another question, Chef, if you could tell everybody more about where you work and what you do. And we know you work at the Lab food truck, but if you could tell folks about the food truck and how, if you go out every day, and a little bit more about your food truck.
Sure. So the Lab food truck, it kind of, it started when I worked at Kimuri. It was kind of my test kitchen for the restaurant group. And we were testing out just new menu items, new concepts, new ideas. And then COVID hit, obviously. So then I took that over full time. But it started out as a lab, as the name suggests. And it started out as that because we were going to doing testing new concepts, testing new recipes. And our business partner happened to be a doctor, so I thought it'd be pretty funny that his nurses would say, "Hey, we're going to the lab for lunch." So it was a play on words, but it was definitely it was my test kitchen, so that's what it's called, the lab. But I didn't want the truck to be tied to a certain food per se, so that's why we kept it open with the lab. So a couple weeks from now, I might have sandwiches, or I might do all tacos, or I might switch it up to just baked goods or something. So I didn't want to be tied to a certain food per se. But we're all over Central Arkansas. We're at the Bernice Garden Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Thursdays we'll be at Urbana Farmstead. We'll be at the Rail Yard. And then on Fridays and Saturdays, we kind of switch between Mimiki Market, Stone's Throw Stiff Station, as well as the Rail Yard again. And then we park in Hillcrest a couple times at Hodge Orthodontics. So we kind of bounce around a lot. We've done we've done events in Mayflower. We've done events all the way in Batesville. We've done events in North Little Rock. So we're kind of all over, and definitely the best place to see our schedule would be on our Facebook or our Instagram page. Every Sunday evening, early Monday morning, I post a schedule, and that gives a whole week schedule for the week. So you can kind of, if you want to plan your week by where you're going to be at on that day, or if you want to just come every day to the food truck, that's great too. But we normally, we're on South Main, downtown, Hillcrest, Stiff Station, so we kind of bounce around a lot. But yeah, just kind of keep a close eye on that Facebook or Instagram page, and you can definitely check us out on there.
Thank you, Chef, so much. We have one more question, and then we also have a participant who has his hand raised, who coincidentally, Mr. Bleed, I know your son Jake, but and so I'll pause here, Mr. Bleed, if you can get in and you have a question, Ellen will unmute you. The other question that was posted, which what's the difference between this tamale and say a New Mexico tamale? That's something our last speaker, author Ann Martin, will talk about the different types of tamales. She wrote a book on it. She started the Hot Tamale Festival. So we'll save that question. So Ann, if you can still hear me, that question's coming your way later. But Peter Bleed, it looks like you're on now. So if you want to ask Chef your question, feel free to go ahead.
Am I broadcasting?
We can hear you.
That was my question that's going to be asked later on. It was great. I loved it, but I was expecting. I just didn't know what to expect, and I'm curious about the history of the Delta tamales. Why? What happens if you wrap them in paper? And you explained why you went with husks, but I'm just trying to get a sense of the local taste.
And Chef Gilbert, if you want to talk about that, you certainly can.
Yeah.
Author Martin can too later. So however you want to handle it.
Yeah, I mean, when I was doing the research, I guess it kind of just depends on, the traditional way is the corn husk. But I know here in Little Rock, I know like Doe's Eat Place, they do them in paper. I think it was for one, it was, I guess, just a personal preference. And then the Delta tamale is seasoned a little bit different. There's more red color in the masa, and there's actually cornmeal. A traditional Delta tamale is straight cornmeal instead of masa. I use a little bit of masa in mine. It's kind of like a half and half ratio because I wanted to add a little bit of that cornmeal. But it's kind of a preference thing. I didn't, when I was reading on the research, I didn't, and I'm pretty sure the speaker that wrote the book on the tamale will definitely be able to. But I think it's more of a preference thing. It might be more of one was more inexpensive or more available at the time. But definitely the Delta tamale and the Mexican tamale are definitely different. The Mexican tamale, you're looking at more pork, even though you can get a Delta tamale in pork. The masa is by far, I think, the biggest difference. The masa in a Mexican tamale is kind of the color of the corn. There's not really too much coloring in the masa, even though I've seen some Mexican tamales that are a little bit, they have a little bit of red tinge to them. But when I was doing the research on the Delta tamale, that was one of the things about the Delta tamale, that it was red. The masa was red, the filling was red. There's a little bit of paprika, there's cayenne. The guajillo is not really a thing for the Delta tamale, but I wanted to kind of add our little spin to it. So I think for me, those were the biggest things. From what I read, those were the biggest things. I'm pretty sure the speaker that comes on later can definitely give a more detailed reason why. But they are the same. They are the tamales, but they're a little bit different. And I really don't have an answer to the paper. I think it just might be a personal preference, or one was more inexpensive than the other, or one was more available than the other. But they both, what they do is just hold the masa and the filling together so they can go ahead and steam. So it kind of just holds it as a wrapper. I don't know, which one would work the best, but I know I've seen both versions. So I hope that answers a little bit of the question.
Thank you, Chef Gilbert, so much. We're virtual, so we can't let everybody clap, but Greta and I'll clap for you. Thank you so much for the delicious meal and for the information about the meal you prepared and for supporting Historic Arkansas Museum tonight. So we'll keep watching you on social media posts to see if those tamales are going to show up again. So thank you, Chef Gilbert, so much. So our next speaker, Greta, who's our next speaker?
Dr. Jessica B. Harris.
That's right. Dr. Harris, I'm so excited to welcome her to Historic Arkansas Museum in this virtual curbside meal History is Served. She is a historian, a professor, a writer, and an educator. She's an expert on food and foodways and the African diaspora and has written 12 books on the topic. Her most recent is called My Soul Looks Back, and it detours from foodways and recounts her life in the early 70s when she debated, celebrated, and danced her way from the jazz clubs of Manhattan's West Side to the restaurants of the Village, living out her youth alongside the great minds of the day. One star Kansan, Maya Angelou, we're glad to see her in the mix, James Baldwin, and Toni Morrison. Dr. Harris is also very impressively the recipient of the 2020 James Beard Lifetime Achievement Award. We also, I think we should note, she's in a different time zone. It's much later for her and she hadn't had dinner. So we're especially grateful for her sticking it out with us tonight. Dr. Harris, we can't wait to hear from you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. So first of all, I may not have dinner, but I've got a cocktail. So I have a glass of wine with me. And I have actually, because I am professorial and given to speaking long and not short, written my speech out. So I'm going to read to you a little bit and hopefully this will answer a few questions. I've been asked to say a few words over the meal or communal meal this evening about African-American foods of and in the Mississippi Delta. So because I think it's important, let's begin by first defining what exactly the Mississippi Delta is. And it's not only a geographic area, but also a state of mind. According to William Bill Ferris, anthropologist, photographer, musical scholar, personal friend, and lover of and griot, the word griot comes from the Malinke term from Mali, gewel, which means a praise singer or historian for most things Southern. The Delta began to develop when settlers arrived as a part of the expanding cotton empire around 1835. And after, that's right, he said after the Civil War, its land was cleared and plantations continued to be developed with Black labor. Another writer defined the Delta as cotton-obsessed, Negro-obsessed, and flood-ridden. It is the deepest South, the heart of Dixie, America's super plantation belt. Still others say that the Delta begins in the lobby of the Peabody Hotel in Memphis and ends in New Orleans. That's a statement that may speak more to the area's political and financial influence than its geography. The geography, though, is particular. Anyone who has visited the region instantly recognizes it. You sense it the minute you cross an escarpment into the Delta. It's palpable. The land glows all flat and the vistas seem to extend to the water's edge. Now, I wouldn't be myself if I didn't remind those of you who are dining tonight that for Black people, the Delta has been perhaps the most dangerous part of the United States for more than a century. At the turn of the 20th century and through the Great Depression, it was the epicenter of sharecropping, and it became a region that folks crawled out of to head north, some landing no further than Memphis, others transforming the ethnic map of the country in places ranging from St. Louis to Chicago. The Delta has a tortured history, and it has seared names like Emmett Till and Fannie Lou Hamer into our collective memories. To know Mississippi, and especially the Mississippi Delta, is to confront the deep, dark history of this country Now, the African-American food and foodways of the Delta are also representative of the history of the place. As Ferris reminds us, African Americans came to the region in large numbers post-Civil War to work the land, bringing with them their varying food cultures from other parts of the state, and indeed from other states. Then the area represented possibility. But with the turn of the century and the complex confluence of voter suppression, land loss, and the general prevalence of what we are now recognizing as systemic racism, the Delta became, by the 1910s and the 1920s, a place of dying hopes and dreams, one of grinding poverty, broken promises, and disappearing, dreams that were disappeared and dreams that were deferred. The resulting African-American food history in the Delta, therefore, is one of constant alchemy, one that transmuted items others discounted as inedible or unwanted into their regional specialties. Turnip greens are a poor folks dish that uses the tops of the turnips that were discarded by others. Add fat back, another less valued thing, as seasoning, and it became a tangy delicacy to be savored as a side dish. It's also a dish that harks back to the African continent in that there are many dishes that are comprised of soupy stews prepared from leaves. There's something in the République du Benin, country used to be called Dahomey, that's simply called sauce feuille, leaf sauce. So the collards, the turnips, and arguably the mustard greens, although particularly the turnip greens, became the tangy delicacy that became a Delta specialty. Fried green tomatoes, a way of saving and using unripe ingredients that might otherwise have to be, if not discarded, might rot, were rendered famous by the 1987 novel of the same name by Fannie Flagg. And although Fannie Flagg, when she's speaking of the Whistle Stop Cafe, is talking about Weems, Alabama, she evokes food that generally come out of the same culinary matrix as those of the African-American Delta. Black-eyed peas. The black-eyed peas are the field peas or cow peas that are native to the African continent. Candied yams, and Chef Gilbert, I hate to tell you, but those are not yams. You would know a nyame. They are candied sweet potatoes. Actually, yams and sweet potatoes, different genus, different species. Yams are old world. There are yams in Africa. If you haven't seen what is called nyame in Spanish markets, or perhaps a yam in China or in Asia, you've never even really seen a true yam. Sweet potatoes, New World. If you've seen the boniatos, if you've seen those things, sweet potatoes, but they're different genus, different species. She talks about lima beans and butter beans and smothered pork chops and fried chicken and more. Fried green tomatoes, sure, but fried pickles are another dish. The crisped pickles offer crunch and tang, but are a relatively modern invention. They are, though, one that plays off the region's unhealthy love of and genius with dropping something into a vat of oil and letting it rip. Following along in that same equation, oil plus vegetable equal bad health, but really good tasty food. There's also fried okra, where the mucilaginous pod is cornmeal coated and prepared according to the region's preferred cooking method. And there's a note. For many, it is the only way that they will consume the slippery vegetable that also originates on the African continent. And I was delighted to know that that okra was a tie for, I think it was second or third place, because I've got okra on my stationery. It is that emblematic of the African continent. And of course, there's catfish. People who don't know the history of the popular fish might ask why it should be considered poor folks' food. The answer is simple. Catfish are bottom feeders, and they were around in the creeks and the little muddy inlets. And when caught in the wild, they are noted for their muddy, dark taste. Here's a fun fact for you. Arkansas in 1963 was the first state to farm-raise catfish. And following that, farm-raised catfish is today the largest aquaculture in the United States. And the Mississippi Delta now raises the lion's share of the country's farmed catfish. What then is the connection to African Americans, you might ask? Well, as bottom feeders and scavengers, traditionally caught catfish were deemed undesirable by genteel folks, in the same way that chicken wings and even dark meat chicken was scorned. How many folks will tell you it's not a really appropriate chicken salad unless it's only white meat chicken? Now, the Delta is also known for its barbecue. And here I will demur with a quote that takes us to the past. In the plantation south, of which the Mississippi Delta was the last epicenter, when there were guests or festivities at the big house, there might be barbecues. The cooks for these events were Black men. The quote, by the way, is from my book, High on the Hog, and the emphasis is mine. They were Black men who used their talents to create an iconic Afro-Southern dish that exists until this day. Barbecuing was and is a complex process replicated today by pit masters, Black and white, throughout the South. But the testimony of one formerly enslaved man tells us a little bit more about it, and I quote, "Night before those barbecues, I used to stay up all night cooking and basting the meats with barbecue sauce. It was made of vinegar, black and red pepper, salt, butter, a little sage, coriander, basil, onion, and garlic. Some folks dropped a little sugar in it. On a long pronged stick, I'd wrap a soft rag or cotton for a swab, and all night long I swabbed the meat until it dripped into the fire. The drippings changed the smoke into seasoned fumes, and that smoked the meat. We turned the meat over and swab it that way all night long until it oozed seasoning and baked all the way through." I don't know about y'all, but that's making me hungry, but you have actually had some ribs, so you may be less hungry than I am at this point. Now, there's not enough time tonight to discuss barbecue because I'm not a barbecue scholar, other than knowing as a former English teacher that barbecue is one of the few words in the language that is both noun, verb, and adjective. You can eat barbecue, you can barbecue something, and you can have a barbecued something. So for barbecue, I actually want to refer you to the work or the oncoming and forthcoming work of two African-American food scholars, Adrian Miller and Howard Conyers, each of whom is working on a book on the African-American art of barbecue. There are other dishes from the Delta that could be discussed: pickled pig's feet and lips, chitlins, neck bones, and of course rice, which could be a 1-hour talk by itself. And then there's more. There's the great and lengthy legacy of African-American waiters in the Delta, and that of African-American chefs. We could dissert on the dessert culture or the condiment culture, think chow chow, and go on to talk about some of the iconic restaurants like Doe's Eat Place. But when you mention Doe's Eat Place, always remember that it began as an African-American restaurant and then became a white establishment. All of those things that will have to wait for another time, because the Delta is indeed a complex place and one that cannot be unwrapped in a brief discussion like this. It is, as you have heard, a place of complex food culture and one where the past confronts the present daily. It is a place where food terms like food deserts and food apartheid exist alongside the hope evidenced by Black catfish farming cooperatives and Black farming initiatives. And in its dishes, its restaurants, and its homes is a region to be studied and to be savored in depth. Thank you. Now, as a final coda, I'm sure that many of you are wondering why I have left out what is perhaps the most iconic of African-American dishes from the Delta, the hot tamale. Well, the reason is simple. The next speaker, Annie Martin, is expert on it, and she will be discussing them. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Greta and I are back. We were trying to get on screen there. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to extend the same offer we had previously with Chef Gilbert. If there are any questions, several of you have figured out how to work the Q&A feature, that you can also raise your hand, and we'll happily take those questions if you have any. I think Dr. Harris said she could hang on for a little while so she can hear our next speaker, author Ann Martin, speak about the hot tamale. And then if you have questions for all the speakers, we do want to try to finish by 8 o'clock so that all of you can get back to your evening. Some of you may have even waited to eat. So we're being respectful of that. I don't see any in the Q&A yet. Ellen, chime in if I'm missing any. But I'll go ahead and introduce Ann Martin, and then she can speak. We do have one question that said, thank you, Dr. Harris. That was fantastic. And we can all agree to that for sure. Thank you so much for those comments. So our next speaker is author Ann Martin. She grew up in the middle of the hot tamale epicenter, Greenville, Mississippi, just across the river from Arkansas, and some place we have all heard of, Rhoda's famous hot tamales in Lake Village, Arkansas. She's an award-winning journalist, and she spent 30 years in broadcast news. She's now a writer, and she documents the stories of her beloved Mississippi Delta and is a regular contributor in Life in the Delta, Eat, Drink, Mississippi. And is the co-founder, also something we've all heard of and that's really cool, of the Delta Hot Tamale Festival. Although, hold on just 1 second. I'm sorry, Ann, if you don't mind, hold on just 1 minute. Dr. Harris, we do have a question for you. Can you tell us a little bit more about Africa, and did it come from, about okra, and did it come from Africa? Because you mentioned that you were glad to see it made the list. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, actually, okra, ironically, I mean, one of the great ironies of okra is it is botanically related to cotton, and it originates on the African continent. So that it is something that was brought, it shows up first in the West Indies and then makes its way up into the United States. It is, for me, an indicator of the African hand in the pot, kind of wherever you see okra, Africa has been. So that would be okra in very brief compass.
Thank you for explaining that more. My daughter was asking me what okra was, and I had to tell her we've eaten it. She just doesn't know it. So thank you for sharing more about the heritage of a food that we love in our home too. So great. And I think we had a couple of more comments that said that was very well done. We enjoyed it. Thank you so much for sharing. So thank you, Dr. Harris, so much. And Ann, I hope we still have you. I hope your husband's truck's internet connection held out, and now we can hear from you. And we did get another comment that said that was great, lots of exclamation points. Thank you again, Dr. Harris.
No problem, thank you.
Oh, she's there, great. So it's still working. We can see you, great. And so Ellen's unmuting you, and we can't wait to hear more from you.
Thank you, Lori. Dr. Harris, I love what you had to say, and I want to hear that whole rice spiel. My husband's a rice farmer. We eat a lot of rice. We grow a lot of rice. I would love to hear that at some point in time. The hot tamale is a food that I grew up eating. I have memories from when I was a little girl, like 4 and 5 years old, eating hot tamales, and it was a staple in our home, probably because one of the brother-in-laws of the Doe's Eat Place family was our backdoor neighbor. And when Sav and Tilly Signal would work at the restaurant, they both helped out up there, and they'd bring home hot tamales. And I can't tell you how many times my mother would be cooking supper and a knock would come at the back door and Tilly would walk in with a very large can, an industrial sized can, or even a coffee can full of hot tamales. And whatever my mom was cooking for supper got pushed to the back burner and we ate hot tamales. So I grew up eating them and I've always loved them. And as I got older, there was always a lot of conversation about where did hot tamales really come from? And we just knew that they were here. There were street carts that were pushed around downtown Greenville that I remember seeing where an African-American gentleman, it was always an African-American gentleman, was selling hot tamales out of his cart. So, you know, my mom, they were usually parked outside of Steinmart. And on Saturday morning, when mom had to go downtown for errands and we ended up at Steinmart, we'd end up buying hot tamales, sometimes out of the back trunk of a car, and then obviously Doe's Eat Place. So as I got older and myself and two other ladies, this conversation was always coming up. And we decided one time we needed to have a festival. Why not? So we started the Delta Hot Tamale Festival in 2012. And that's when I really began to realize how many hot tamale makers there were around the Delta. We all grew up knowing about Doe's Eat Place and some of the other vendors around Greenville, but then there were so many others out there. And then that also spawned the book that I wrote, Delta Hot Tamales, History, Stories, and Recipes. And I know some of you purchased that tonight. Thank you for that. It is available at the museum store for those who might want to pick it up later. But it really prompted me to delve into where the tamale came from, why it's still here, and why do we love it so much. It does have deep roots in a Mexican heritage. It either came from soldiers returning from the Mexican-American War or the migrant workers who came in. It's that goes both ways. There's also a train of thought by some people there's a little Italian in there. I don't believe that so much, but if somebody wants to believe that, that's fine. But the Mexican tamale, as it was asked earlier, what is the difference between the Mexican tamale and the Delta hot tamale? And in the Delta, we do call them hot tamales. If you're having a conversation, somebody's, you know, they may loosely say tamales, but a Mexican tamale is referred to as a tamale, and the Delta tamale is referred to as a hot tamale. The main difference being that the Mexican tamale is not as spicy as the Delta hot tamale, and there's way more masa. So what we all believe happened is the Mexican tamale found its way to the Mississippi Delta. And it was the African-American cook, mainly the women, who saw this portable food and thought, I can make that. The ingredients were very simple. They were ingredients that were found in most homes at that time. There was cornmeal, there was beef or pork, and then seasonings. And they worked on making this hot tamale that could be packed up and taken to the field, and it was portable. It was wrapped in the corn shuck and eaten. It could be eaten hot or cold. But over the years, so many people decided, I want to learn how to make hot tamales. Well, they would get a recipe from someone or a partial recipe, and then they would adjust those seasonings to their own. And so many tamale makers have told me personally that those recipes are sacred. They don't share them. If you look at a map from Memphis, and I love the fact that Dr. Harris used the quote that was from a very well-known Delta writer, David Cohn, that the Delta begins in the lobby of the Peabody Hotel and ends on Catfish Row in Vicksburg. If you look at that map and look at how many hot tamale makers there are in the Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana Delta, that's where they're concentrated. And even more so in southern Bolivar County and northern Washington County, the Greenville, Cleveland area, which is where I live. And they took these tamales, they developed these recipes, and they would not share them. Somebody might say, oh, I'll give you the recipe, but they would intentionally leave out at least one ingredient. And to this day, there are tamale makers who do not share their recipes. If they don't pass that recipe on to someone who's truly going to make them, there are recipes that are dying with the tamale makers. There's a gentleman up in Clarksdale who told me a few years ago that he wanted to sell his business, and with the business came the recipe. And at last I talked to him about 2 years ago. He was still trying to find someone to sell the business to. And until then, his recipe remained locked in the family safe. You at one time could only find hot tamales in the push carts, very few restaurants. Doe's Eat Place, which at that time, Dr. Harris, I love that you brought this up. It was a local neighborhood grocery store, and the tamales were sold out of the front and in the back. White customers would come in and maybe get a steak. And Big Doe Signa realized that the tamales were just as popular, so he eventually got rid of the grocery store aspect that he had and turned the whole thing into a restaurant, and everybody got to enjoy the tamales and the steaks. But so many people had carts that they pushed around downtown, and there was a chance that the tamale makers would call out as they pushed through the downtown area or neighborhoods, and they would go, Molly man, get your red hots. And they would all have a chant that they would yell out that the tamale man was in the neighborhood. And that's how they were served and sold for years. Not only are they showing up in fine restaurants now and being served on silver platters at cocktail parties, the tamale has taken on a whole new life, much different than when it started out. They are being shipped all over the country. There are a couple of tamale makers in the Greenville area that literally are shipping their tamales nationwide. One of those families is the Scott family of Metcalf, Mississippi. They have been making tamales since about 1941, about the same time that Doe's started. And the Scott family is kind of considered the first family of Delta hot tamales. The father found this recipe, brought it home to his wife, and Aaron and Elizabeth Scott together developed the recipe that their family still makes to this day. On Wednesday and Thursday, you can go to their home. The father had built this special room under the house, and it's still family members, about 7 at a time, that get together and make the tamales. And they are wonderful if you've never had them. You either have to mail order them, or they have a little hot tamale stand where they sell them. But I do have an answer about why some tamales are wrapped in paper, and it all started with Doe's Eat Place. At this particular time, and this was back in the 60s at some point, Big Doe Signa was getting his corn shucks from a corn farmer in Texas. The shucks were coming in, the farmer retired at some point, and he then had to order his corn shucks straight from Mexico. And this was working great for a while, until one time when a shipment was intercepted, because buried deep among all those corn shucks was another herb called marijuana. And Big Doe Signa said, I'm not doing this anymore. He did not want to get caught with anything illegal or take the chance. So that's when Doe's Eat Place went to using the parchment paper wrapper. I believe they were the first ones. They use it exclusively. They have thought about going back to it, but they said it's just too easy now. They're going to stick with it. And a few other places followed suit because of that. And also, talking about sharing recipes, Doe's was so particular about his recipe that when his sons, Little Doe and Charles, were growing up, and when they were in high school in the mid-60s, he would wait till the restaurant was closed, everybody was gone, the kids had, done their jobs at the restaurant and gone home and gone to bed for the evening, and he would go get them up about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to come back and help make the hot tamales. And that way, it stayed secret. To this day, only a couple of 3 people at Doe's know that recipe. Barbara Pope, who has Joe's Whitefront Cafe here in Rosedale, her brother began making hot tamales in the late 1940s, and he had gotten his hands on a recipe, developed it, and on his deathbed, when Joe was 80, his sister was living in Chicago. He called her home, and they were in the hospital, and he said, Barbara, do you know how to make the tamales? And she said, I don't know. And on his deathbed, he told her the recipe. And she said, thank goodness the other sister was sitting there, because she had not written it all down. The people that are still making the tamales, they do it out of love. A lot of people have made a living off of this. Others, it's a secondary job. But tamales are like one of the few foods that have to be touched by human hands. You can use a machine to actually put the tamale that you're going to roll it in that paper or that corn shuck. Human hands have to touch it. So you got to love what you do. And it's fun to watch it when it's actually made by hand. I have actually developed a few recipes myself using hot tamale as an ingredient. I do not cook with them. There's too many great hot tamale makers around the Delta. I don't need to learn how. I just like to eat them and I like to use them as an ingredient in making different hors d'oeuvres or little snack items, different dips. One of my favorite is the hot tamale grilled cheese sandwich. Some good bread, buttered on both sides, just like you would a regular grilled cheese. And then take your hot tamales, smash them up, and spread them not too thick on the bread with cheese. And I've experimented with several different kinds of cheese. The first time I did it was with mustard cheese to overpower the hot tamale, or the hot tamale to overpower the cheese. Then grill it, meal. It's a great hors d'oeuvre when you cut it into fours. So you can do a lot of things with hot tamales. We are a hotbed right here. And the one thing I've learned about hot tamales is you can't say hot tamales without smiling. And it truly has become a food that is indicative of the Delta. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. Now that we have a festival that honors the hot tamale every year, and hundreds of people come every year to sample a lot of different kinds of hot tamales. And I hope that you'll come and join us one year for that. In the meantime, always enjoy hot tamales, and don't be afraid to serve them at a fancy party or to have them just for a snack. It is something that is truly indicative of the Delta. And Rhoda's at Lake Village has some of the best around. If you've never had the opportunity to check it out.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Ann. We did have a question, and I agree. You can't say hot tamales without smiling. Someone said, is there such a thing as a cool tamale?
You can't. Try it. It doesn't work.
Is there such a thing as a cool tamale?
No, but there are taste than others. I have gotten a hold of some that were very spicy, to say the least, that I'm going, oh, I can't eat those. And then there's some that are a little milder, but no, there's no such thing as a cool tamale. They're all hot, and it's because of the seasoning. All tamales have these same basic seasonings. It's just the amount of how much that particular cook decides to put in.
Great. Are there any other questions for Ann or any of our other speakers? I'm checking the chat and the Q&A. I don't want to miss anyone. We got several comments about that was great. Thanks to all the panelists. Wonderful evening. I'm making sure. There was another one that, have you been to Solly's Tamales in Vicksburg? And where does it, if so, where does it rank in your top places for tamales?
I am ashamed to say I have never been to Solly's. And even after I wrote the book, I thought I really should have gotten down there. But I was sticking to a very specific geographic location when I wrote the book. And I have not been there. It is on my list to go. I've heard nothing but good things about Solly's. So I tried out. I would just say, yes, they're good, and try it out. I've never had a tamale that I would say I truly didn't like. I have a running list of my top 5, top 10, and it changes constantly because as I've tried new tamale makers, somebody will hit the list. And there's a gentleman in Clarksdale who makes chicken tamales all the time. And Tony's Tamales in Jackson, Mississippi, makes chicken tamales a lot, and they're really good. So, you know, in the last 10 to 20 years, the meat in the tamales has changed to accommodate a little healthier lifestyle. But to accommodate all kinds of taste.
And then there was another question. Can you see it about the Tamale Festival? Did you see it? Okay,
yes.
Tell us more. And this will be, we'll close on this note because it's a fun one to close on.
The festival is always held the third weekend in October in downtown Greenville. I don't know if plans are underway. They're proceeding on, but it's probably going to be a last minute decision. But there are always 20 to 30 hot tamale vendors there from all over, people who only make them at home, and then there are the commercial folks as well. There's always good music. There's a hot tamale eating contest. We have a hot tamale king and queen. Myself and the 2 other ladies who founded the festival have the opportunity once a year to put on a skirt that is completely encrusted with corn shucks, and we just embrace it. We embrace the tamale. We invite everybody to come. It is truly a lot of fun.
That sounds like a fantastic celebration of food heritage. And thank you so much, Ann. Thank you, Dr. Harris. Thank you, Chef Gilbert, for participating. All of you out there in cyberspace who we don't see on the screen, but we know you're there. Thank y'all for participating. We really appreciate the support of pivoting to this curbside meal that we weren't, you know, a big part of this is how we get together and talk about food. And so we're going to close out the night with one final poll question, which is what? Greta's going to read it.
Which was your favorite course tonight?
Yeah, which was your favorite course tonight? Everybody vote, and we'll get to see. You had 5 courses. Greta and I are really disappointed we didn't have the chess pie here with us, so I hope y'all enjoyed that. But select your favorite course for the night. We'll show that on screen as we're voting. I want to make sure y'all know about the next History is Served meal that Historic Arkansas Museum, or as we call it, HAM or Hamily, that we'll be hosting, and it's focused on the Italian communities of the Delta. Mark your calendars. We already have the date for that. It's going to be September 17th. Given the rate of COVID infections in the state, I'm pretty sure it's going to be another curbside meal. It's going to be another fun night, and we hope you can join us for that. But let's see what the answer was to the poll. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So pork rib plate got slightly more than half, and then our filled peas and chow chow and the tamales tied for second. So, and then that's great. So, but what the good news is it looks like all the courses were enjoyed. So thank y'all for participating in the poll. Greta and I are going to clap for our speakers again, since you can't see in the virtual world all of the people who enjoyed the food and the talk and the great information you shared with us about food heritage. So thank you again for participating. Greta, what do you want to say last?
Thank you all and have a great evening.
That's right. Thank you all and have a great evening. So much for doing this historic thing with us. And I see all of the great comments for those panelists. You may not be able to see in the Q&A all the comments. Great program, great food, great time. So thank you all. We hope to see you September 17th. Bye.
Bye.
All right.